Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to our August 3rd Thursday Writing YA Today. My name is Sam Babiak and I'm the Program Director for the Writers League. And before we get started with this conversation, I'm just gonna introduce our panelists. So first up, we have Sajni Garzavia. Sajni Garzavia is a product of the great state of Texas, born and raised along the Gulf Coast and a decade-long resident of San Antonio. Sajni is an author of contemporary young adult fiction that maintains a brand of being proudly Latinx and the most queer and embracing the power and beauty of the chaotic gay. 1500 Miles from the Sun is their debut novel. For more information, visit www.sajnigarzavia.com. Thank you, Sajni, for being here. Next up, Jason June. Jason June, it's a two-name first name like Mary Kate without the hyphen or the Olsen twin, is a genderqueer writer mermaid who loves to create picture books that makes the flamboyantly wacky with the slightly dark and young adult contemporary rom-coms full of love and lust and hijinks. His debut queer YA rom-com, Jay's Gay Agenda, about gay Type A Virgo listmakers is out now. When not writing, JJ zips about Austin, Texas with his Pomeranian, Pom Brokaw, and daydreams about fashions inspired by Laura Dern. Thanks, Jason June, for being here. And last but not least, award-winning author Sajni Patel was born in vibrant India and raised in the heart of Texas. She draws on her personal experiences, cultural expectations, and Southern flair to create worlds centered around strong Indian women. Once in MMA, she's now all about puppies, rainbows, and tortured love stories. She divides her time between Hawaii, where Hanu is her #1 obsession, and Austin, where she not so secretly watches Matthew McConaughey from afar during UT football games. Queso is her weakness, and thanks to her family's cooking, Indian Tex-Mex cuisine is a real thing. She's a diehard Marvel Comics fan, an ube fanatic, and is always wrapped up in a story. Thanks, Sajni, for being here. Okay, so let's get started with this conversation. I like to start these by asking authors why they write what they write. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time with each of you at the start of this, so you can tell us why you write for young adults. And also, please feel free to tell us a little bit about your debut YA novels. And Sajni, I'll start with you.
Oh, unmute, unmute real quick. Now I forgot what I was going to say. So my name is Sajni Patel. Thank you so much for having me here. I write YA because it's something that just came naturally to me. I've tried other age groups and it just wasn't for me. It was very difficult. So YA and actually a little bit of adults are things that come more naturally to me. I want to see books. I try to create books where I can see myself in it, and try to create stories where I would have related a lot more to growing up. And I'm hoping that other readers feel the same way. So my debut, YA, The Knockouts, is about a teenage Indian girl. She's in Muay Thai, and she's coming to terms with her identity as part of being in the Indian culture, as well as being in Austin, in the Southern culture, and just kind of bringing everything together in her life, as well as dealing with some issues. And she is also dealing with bullies and body shaming and some things like that. So it's really interesting, it was for me anyway, to have a character who was such a kick-butt character, like physically she could rip you apart, but then she is so fragile emotionally and has her own self-esteem issues. And so I just wanted to bring that all about and show a little bit of my background growing up in Austin, as well as being Indian, obviously, but also into fighting sports, in MMA, which is what I grew up in. I'm not as kick butt as Karina. I'm really scared of getting hit, but that's part of the creative process, right? Not writing something that I'm totally comfortable with and going outside of my sphere, which is a kick butt girl.
Absolutely. And it's such a great book. I had so much fun reading Karina's character. Jason June, what about you?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to be here. I write YA because for the longest time, I was trying to write like straight up fantasy with witches and wizards and magic systems and all these things. And I couldn't get it to work. And so in this sort of palate cleanse that I had after being frustrated that I tried to make 3 fantasy novels work that didn't, I started to read a lot of contemporary YA. And it was when I was reading those that I realized there's a magic in real life that doesn't have to be literal magic, like fairies and elves and all that, but just the magic of human connection. And I think when you're a teen, there are so many firsts that are really magical, and finding that power in yourself where you finally get to make choices to build the life around you that you want that are outside of your parents' influence, I think is just such a really fun thing to explore. So that's what I went for in Jay's Gay Agenda, my debut YA. That was all about the magic in getting to be gay for the very first time, like physically get to be gay, be around other gay people, and unlocking that magic that comes from human connection and comes from making mistakes and learning how to grow from them, and from figuring out how to interact with other personality types and still find a happy ending for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Station June. What about you, Johnny?
Yeah, hi, I'm Johnny Garzavia, and why I write YA, you probably blame Becky Albertalli. I read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, which is like one of my favorite books ever, and then very shortly after went and saw Love, Simon, and kind of just like left both of those thinking like, why don't like young gay Chicanos kind of have the same story? Why don't we get to have that story and then have it be like on a movie screen? Like, why don't we get those sort of chances? And someone should write that. And then I just did it myself. But like, I think I specifically like writing in that upper YA sort of age range of like 17, 18, even 19, like senior year, summer after graduation, even like college age YA, because there's just something so significant about that time, right? Like, I like to say that we're at that point where we feel so adult-like we're getting ready to graduate and maybe go to college and get that sorted out and thinking about moving away from home. But it also simultaneously makes us feel so young and so unknowledgeable about the world and our future, and experiencing changes that are going to dramatically shape us into who we're going to be. And I love exploring what it is to experience both of those and how they kind of like clash, but also embrace. And in my own novel, 1500 Miles from the Sun, which looks like this, don't perceive my nails, please. Jules has his eyes set on graduating and getting into UCLA and living far away from Texas and what that could mean for him as a currently closeted gay kid. But he also makes mistakes, like coming out as gay on Twitter after getting tremendously drunk at a party. And now he has to navigate figuring out how to live his truth openly while navigating an unsafe home environment and what that means for him as a soccer player going to a Catholic high school and figuring out this new friendship with a long distance Twitter crush who's sliding into his DMs that's quickly turning into maybe a romance. And like, while it's a contemporary romance, it's also a coming of age story. And those are just always my favorite. A good coming of age storyline will always have my heart. And I think that's why I really gravitate towards YA. But like, especially when I get to celebrate my identities as a queer person and as a Tejana and Chicana and in my home and like Texas and specifically like South Texas and like anywhere like San Antonio and below, because like if we hear about Texas in books, it's usually like Houston or Dallas or somewhere out in the country with no brown people. So like this has been really phenomenal for me to do.
Thank you, Johnny. And I think what you said about 17, 18-year-olds, like that just being a really intense and good age to explore. All of your books, actually, your protagonists are that age. So that was really interesting to read. And I loved how you all just like took on this age and explored the different themes, you know, in your own stories. And so we've already talked about why you write YA, but I want to talk about actually writing YA. And so you all have unique experiences, your careers are in different stages. And so I want to spend a little time with each of you just talking about your process in writing this debut YA novel. And Johnny, I will start with you because this is your debut YA, but also your debut in general. So one, congratulations, that's incredible. But yeah, so what are some things that aspiring YA authors should be thinking about when setting out to write their first YA novel? And how did that process unfold for you? Oh, I think you're muted.
I was muted. I would say that like YA and especially contemporary YA has the ability to be very character forward and character driven rather than plot driven, which I love. Like I don't know how to write plot, so it's great. And just because of that, like I would say just throw away the idea that you as a writer have to somehow prove, or that you need to have this delicate, beautiful prose or anything that is taking you away from that perspective. Like when I started drafting 1500 Miles from the Sun, I wanted every line to be as beautiful as Benjamin Allaire Science's prose. Like I just think that he like it's poetry. And then I wanted people to tattoo my words on them. I wanted like the next red, white, and royal blues history, like, and I was just like, I need that. That's the only option. And like I was viewing the technical aspect of writing as a measure for whether or not the book was good. And well, that does hold some importance. What really matters is that you tell the story the main character deserves and that your audience deserves. Um, I remember Adib Khorram once telling me that I should stop trying to prove how clever I am and just tell Jules's story. And like, while that was definitely a read, like it was also just really great advice. And like, it just allowed me to take a breath and relax the shoulders and just tell Jules's story. And so that's kind of what I've been trying to do is just relax. Like you're not writing like an essay. No one's grading this. Just like do what you need to do.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Johnny. What about you, JJ? I know your experience is a little bit different in that you actually wrote picture books and you've written chapter books for young children. So in addition to talking about your process in writing this YA novel, can you talk a little bit about transitioning from young children to young adults?
Totally. So I don't know what I'm trying to say here, obviously. I guess the only difference that all the things that I write are really character driven. Just like Johnny, I'm thinking about this person and their voice first that I'm following, and then the actions that they're gonna go through are gonna come second. So essentially when I got into YA, my main thing was I wanted to be honest about how horny people can be when they're a teenager. And that is obviously something I'm not going to put in my chapter books or my picture books. But it was really important to me in Jay's Gay Agenda that I explore the inner monologues of sexually desiring teenagers that happen to have a penis. And I know that everyone who has a penis does not have the same sex drive that Jay has and don't necessarily want to have the same accomplishments, but it was really important to me when writing YA and in my my other YA novels that I've been working on, that I'm really inside of their head and being honest about the sort of quote unquote gritty truth, maybe, because I don't want to call it ugly truth, because I don't think wanting sexual connection is ugly by any means. But I think it's, at least for me, between the ages of 15 and 19, I was constantly thinking about sex, and I wanted that to be normalized, and I wanted somebody to tell me that was okay. And so in my YA work, I would do that. I get into my characters' heads talking about the things that we're too afraid to say out loud, but so many of us are thinking. And then for picture books and like my chapter book series, I really wanted to kind of take that same angle of voicing thoughts that we have in our heads that we're a little afraid to say out loud. And I find with younger audience especially, it's a lot of insecurities in ourselves that we're afraid to say, that we're afraid to show weakness, because it seems like everyone around us has everything figured out, our parents and our friends and family members and all of that, people on TV. So I want my readers to know that they're not alone, and regardless of age range, to say the hard truths that sometimes we're afraid to say out loud.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sajni, and what about you? You have written adult romances. You published one before your YA novel, and you have another adult romance coming out later this year. So what has that been like for you?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My computer it has that little circle thing going, so I don't know about my connection here. So I'm sorry, it's lagging. You guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just gonna go ahead. So yeah, so going back and forth, I don't remember.
We'll just wait a moment to see if she connects back. Zoom, it happens. Okay, I think I'll move on to the next question and I'll come back to Sajni if she reconnects. But yeah, so I think all of your books are incredibly nuanced, and I think we've already talked a little bit about the similarities between the age, and I think you all have like just these great purposes behind the reasons why you want to write for young adults. And in reading all of your books, I came across, while they were all different stories for sure, there were things that I found that were similar. Things like first love and picking a college, and your characters dealt with loneliness. And there were so many, like your characters also like looked for friends and found family. And there was also in some of your stories, just like dealing with parents who are either sick or don't understand you and things like that. So I think Sajni is coming back in, but I'll just move on with this question and I'll come back to her. But so I'm wondering like why you felt it was important to explore some of these things in your book and why it was central to writing for young adults. And so I will come back to you, Johnny, and Sajni, I'll come back to you in a second.
Yeah, I think there's a relevance. Like I wanted to have the opportunity to give people, especially young people, conversations that, in my opinion, aren't had a lot, especially when it comes to being like a queer Chicane or a queer person of color in general. And all of the ways that our books might cross over, like I think I'll speak on just a couple of things. Like I get complimented a lot on like the sex talk that Jules and Matt have with Matt's older brother and brother-in-law about like safe sex and like the 4 C's. And if you have read it, then you know what the 4 C's are. If you haven't read it, then you'll figure it out when you read it. Because we don't really get a lot of that, as well as just like presenting getting into and paying for college. Like those are kind of like 2 things that I get complimented on a lot, and like what that looks like, and just putting them in this sort of realistic headspace, and one that is also like safe and comfortable, and like speaking with people that you can trust, and just in all of those different ways. Just because like honestly, like growing up, I couldn't go to my parents to talk about sex and like what that means as a gay person, and I couldn't talk about who I was attracted to at school to my friends. And honestly, like college and how we were supposed to pay for it from the get-go was just pure stress, as the first person in my family to attend a university and not come from wealth by any means, and also be like 18 years old. So like being able to present those in a way that like was honest, but also wanting to put like actual information in there that like made it seem real, and like, okay, like there are people actually struggle, like it's fine, like it can be fiction, but we can still include that sort of situations. I really enjoyed including. And I guess like one more trope within our similarities that I really liked was including found family, especially within Jules's friend group. Like when I was 17, 18, the friends that I had were not people that I would have felt comfortable coming out to. I don't think I could have relied on them for support or acceptance. And the first decision I made about this story was that his high school friend group was not going to be like mine. They were going to be fiercely loyal and loving and protective. And in my opinion, they're all already great characters individually. So that just like made it even more fun.
Thanks, Johnny. And JJ, why did you explore these themes in your work, and why did you think it was important?
Well, for just like Johnny talked about, and that I was mentioning before, with sex positivity and just being frank about wanting to have sex, I think is super important. So we just normalize the fact that so many teenagers want to have sex, and that's not a bad thing by any means. And as long as your partner and you are on the same page, that everything is safe and consensual, it is magical to explore your body and to bond over that. And then there were other things that I wanted to touch on, like socioeconomic status. Jay realizes through his friend Lou that not everybody gets to just be a teenager. Sometimes they're literally relied upon to be a part of their family's bread and butter. And I think that's really important, that kids see, even in something that's as lighthearted as a rom-com, and even in times in our life where things can feel really stress-free and magical, that finances are always there, and that it's something that we have to keep our world going. And it's a weird thing, and I just wanted to touch on that reality in this. And then other than that, the only other thing that I really talked about was stereotypes, and how with so many marginalized groups, there are stereotypes for every one of them. But also then within those groups, and like with Jay specifically, there are bits of ourselves that meet the stereotype. And so what does that, I wanted to explore our own internal monologue or dialogue about fitting a stereotype. And does that mean I'm somehow contributing to it? Does it mean I'm somehow like less authentically whatever, insert demographic here if I don't have all of them, or all of that? So I just want to talk about our different aspects of identity and how it's really for us to determine what makes us us. And just because I like to watch RuPaul's Drag Race doesn't mean every gay person likes RuPaul's Drag Race, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that was actually really wonderful in your book. And I liked how you explored stereotypes through different lenses, like with Albert and robotics and the drag race and all that stuff. So Sajni, hello.
Hi, sorry about that.
No worries, it happens. But yeah, so we'll go back to your first question, which I asked you about your transition from adult writing to writing for young adults, and sort of the process of writing your YA novel.
Yeah, so going back and forth wasn't as difficult for me as I think it might be for some people. I tried lower age groups like middle grades and chapter books, and it just wasn't my thing. It was too hard for me. But there's like the YA, especially when you're an upper YA and adults, when you have some, I guess, younger themes in it, they kind of go together. So it's like an easy step to go up or to go back down. And for me anyway, so my process for writing YA has always been whatever comes to me first. Sometimes it's plot and sometimes it's character, and just kind of building around that, around whatever comes first to me. With the knockouts, Karina came first, the main character, and I knew that she was going to be a fighter and have some issues. So the story had to revolve around that. And with YA, I think one of the bigger things that I have to make a conscious effort about is making YA a little bit more action oriented, more dialogue, whereas my adult can be a bit slower, have more builds, more world building to it. And so with YA, I have to switch my brain a bit and try to make it faster, because I'm thinking that my younger audience wants to stay engaged. They don't want to get bored off of those first couple pages, or to get bored in the middle and be like, oh, I'm not going to finish this book, it's DNF. So that was, so those are some of the things that I try to work on when I'm writing YA. And then I also have to keep in the forefront, and sometimes I'll have like a whiteboard with storyboarding on it to make sure I stay focused on who the character is and what her conflicts are, and make sure I'm always coming back to those things and making sure they're building and progressing so that I can have a good ending or an ending period. And so, yeah, it's a lot for me at this point. I've been writing for a long time. I haven't been published for a long time, but it's a continuous process to keep my notes together and to always go back to my notes to make sure that I am catching these things.
Thank you so much, Sajni. And I love that you mentioned about the pacing, because I thought you did that so well. Like Karina's fight scenes and all of those were just like so riveting, and I couldn't wait to get to the next page. But yeah, so I did ask a question while you were out. And so I'll just like say that again for you, and you can talk a little bit. So I talked about the similarities between your books and how all of your protagonists are actually 17, 18 years old, but also the fact that many of your characters deal with things like first love, or picking a college, or dealing with loneliness, which I thought Karina really dealt a lot with, but also like found family and friends and all of these different themes. So I was wondering why you felt it was important to explore these themes in your work, and why you think they're so central to the young adult genre in general.
I think teens, they're oftentimes still finding themselves, and maybe having a book where they can relate or see how a character goes about things might be helpful to them, or to at least alleviate some stress in their lives. Like, oh, okay, other people are going through this thing too. And maybe that person that you think is so perfect is not really that perfect after all, and having some empathy for them. So with Karina, I needed her to come across these issues and to deal with it, but maybe not in a way that might have been straightforward, because teens are not always straightforward. Adults aren't always straightforward, for that matter. And just having her focus and learn about what's more important. And even though she's young and she needs to make decisions, and how she deals with things can affect her mentally as well as emotionally. And so I wanted everything to kind of tie in together so that readers can understand, one aspect of your life can affect the other aspects of your life. And if you're trying to solve one issue, maybe you need to kind of backtrack and look at other issues. And it's all kind of like a revolving circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sajni. So for my next question, I kind of want to talk about the limits of YA. So last October, I moderated one of our Ask Us Anything conversations on writing middle grade in YA. And folks had so many questions about what was allowed, what was age appropriate, and all that kind of stuff. And I think all of you did some really great things in your books. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how you approached navigating and talking about things that are difficult or people might consider too adult for young adults. And Jason, I'll start with you, because I think your book, it's so sex positive and you've talked about that already, but how did you go about that? And what are your thoughts on just like age appropriate things in YA?
Yeah, I think there's never any age where it's inappropriate to talk about anything. I think you can change your terminology and how you're going to describe certain things, but I think you can talk about any topic with any person of any age. Specifically with sex positivity and sex in general in Jay's Gay Agenda, it was really important to me to be frank and honest about thoughts and feelings and body parts and bodily reactions, but not get into the realm of erotica. So when we get to the scene where Jay loses his virginity, I wanted it to be clear what was happening at all points in times and what Jay wanted to do and what his partner's body was doing, what his body was doing. But I'm not doing it in a way that gets really, really, really verbose and is describing, that could get into those kind of erotica tropes, like describing what everyone's throbbing member looks like or anything like that. I'm not going to do that. But still talking about the things that Jay desires, because I think that there's such a shame spiral specifically about queer sex that our society has had in the recent past. And that is something that sits with you for the rest of your life. When I was a teenager and wanted to have sex with another male-bodied person, there was nowhere I could turn to be told that that was a normal, natural, beautiful thing to want. And that's what I want to do with my work, is to show people who have bodies similar to mine that the thoughts that they may be having are a beautiful, wonderful thing. And part of that is naming those thoughts, which is why I've been so repetitive, I think, about being frank about these thoughts, wanting to see another penis, what you want to do with that penis, naming what you want to do with that penis in the work. So that because if we can't even say what we want to do in a book that we're reading to ourselves, it sends the message that it's shameful to be thinking these things, because you can't even write it down in a book, which is just, that needs to change in my mind. So, and I think that should be the same for sex, for all genders and all sexualities, that there should be frank conversations about it, what our bodies do and what we want to do, and frank conversations about people who are asexual or aromantic and what it feels like for them to not be relating to that when some of their peers are wanting to be sexually active. I think that's also important. And just walk that line of being honest, but not getting gratuitous.
Yes to everything you just said. Thank you so much, JJ. Johnny, I'm going to come to you now. And I think your book was also sex positive. You dealt with a lot of mental health, but what really stood out to me was the way that you dealt with trauma in the book. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about your author's note. No book has ever made me cry before I even read the first page, but yours did. And it just, there were, you included trigger warnings in that author's note. And I was wondering if you could talk about that and how you approached navigating all of this stuff.
Yeah, I would love to. I remember seeing this tweet recently, and like the basic premise of it was that there isn't anything a teen somewhere hasn't gone through. Like, as beautiful or even on the opposite spectrum, as shitty as that is, like, it's true. Like, somewhere a teenager has had parents who react to hearing a child's gay, like Simon Spear got to. And there are still actual alive teenagers like Jules, whose experience is a full 180 from that. And the stories that come from both of those perspectives deserve shelf space, like, just period. And like you mentioned in my author's note, at the beginning of my book, that I don't know, like, the book really did become more personal than I really ever intended it to be whenever I first started drafting it. And just like making those decisions of like step by step, including these sort of scenarios and scenes, it just like, so, you know, it just turned into so much of Jules's personal history and trauma is my own personal history and traumas, and so much of his fears are my fears. But maybe that also helped me as I wrote his story and navigated what I wanted to and chose to put on the page as far as trauma and mental health, while processing a lot of emotions that I'd never taken the time to feel ever, helped. And just like, because I know that, like, I've heard people just say that like they can feel that it comes from a real place. And like, yeah, that also is shitty, but like the fact that it's also resonating with young people in that way too, and just like making them feel less alone, is great. But also, like, I did really intend for that author's note, like, please read it. And like, if you're like, wow, this sounds like a lot, like, it, then maybe like just set it down for a little bit. Don't buy it just yet. Like, it'll always be there. It's fine. Like, I have copies under my bed. If it ever goes out of print, like, I'll just send you one. But like, you know, I really intended it to be like, here's the tea about it. Like, here's just me coming to you as the author of this. And like, if you know what this feels like, I'm sorry. I send you so much love. And also, like, just regardless, check in with yourself. And you know, I mean, I feel like a lot more books should be having those sort of things in them, like starting with what is going on, what's happening, what to expect if it's something triggering. You know, my next book, we include like another author's note, even though it's not really for triggering stuff. It's just like, because I guess my agent likes it when I write author's notes. So it's just become a thing. But yeah, like, it all started from querying. Like, when I was querying agents, I included in a little text box on the cover page, like, content warnings. Here's a list of content warnings. And my agent, whenever we had our first phone call, was like, this is fantastic. It needs to stay. Like, we're going to tell our eventual publisher, like, even if it's a little box or it's something somewhere in the book, like, there needs to be some sort of content warning, especially for young queer people. That way they know what they're getting into before they start reading it. So that's always just been really important for me and for my agent and for my editor, thankfully, from the get-go. But also, like, when it comes to sex, I think that like choosing to put sex in YA is great. Like, that's fine. Like, teens are having sex. Like, we've all been to high school, we know what happens. I think it's important that we be smart about it and know what positivity is and just not be harmful. And really, when I say that, like, I'm thinking very specifically, and I'm going to bash a show I personally really enjoy for a second, but there was this episode in the newest season of Love, Victor, where it shows a high school sophomore using a hookup app. And what really bothered me about it was just that they kind of let it happen. There was no sense of, why is this 15-year-old on that app, and bringing up how unsafe it is for a 15-year-old. And like, to this day, that kind of bothers me. Like, sex and YA is fine. I think that how it's portrayed and discussed is really kind of, your mileage may vary on like the particular reader, whether they're wanting it or not, or the editor or the author. But I think the minimum is definitely just don't have underage kids on hookup apps and pretend that's fine. You know, but I think that's really just like one in a million from like the YA that I've encountered and read. Like, most of it's just, they do it very respectfully. And yeah, and just like in the end, I don't necessarily believe in limits, but I believe in being intelligent about our writing and what we're presenting to our audience, which at the end of the day are teenagers. So yeah.
Yes, thank you, Johnny. Sajni, what about you? What do you think?
I think every story has the story in it. So if you are writing a story where that's appropriate, that's what you want to tell, then that's fine. But not all stories are that way. However, it's really hard to say that there should be a limit with YA, because yeah, teens are going through so much stuff and they're inundated with so many stresses and troubles and people telling them that this is wrong or that you should be this way, or, you know, a number of things. So a lot of times I've heard teens have a difficult time finding someone to talk to, whether it's a parent or even friends, maybe even a counselor. And they go out and they try to find a way to deal with something or to try to understand what's happening to them. And a lot of times it's in books. And that's one of the reasons why we have a push for more diversity in books, so that teens can see themselves and to know that these issues are maybe normal or maybe they're not normal, but it happens to other people too. And here are some ways that this character is dealing with it. And so you can help teens in a way where they might not be getting help somewhere else. But of course, as I was saying earlier, it's about how your story is, and not all stories are going to have an area where you're wanting to push limits, but some stories need that because that's part of the story and that's where the story needs to go. So it always depends on where the story needs to go to be told. And I know for myself, when I write things in every book, my editor, but first and foremost, my agent, she will point out something if it sounds problematic. She will point out something to say, I don't think this is very realistic, or like Johnny was saying, okay, so TV shows will get away with having something like a 15-year-old on an app like that. But in my writing, someone's going to catch it and they're going to say, no, you know, this is not right. We need to look at it from all angles. What kind of messages it's sending, and, you know, things like that. So TV and writing are so different. I feel like if I was a script writer, I could just get away with whatever, but not in writing. And I owe it to my readers. I owe it to readers to get the whole picture, to make sure that it's not problematic, to make sure that I'm looking at all angles, to make sure that I know how my story is coming off. And if I need to push boundaries to tell the story, if that's realistic for my story, then that's what has to be done. But me personally, I wouldn't be very graphic about things because you can still get away with telling a story without being too graphic. But then when we're looking at limits, you know, sometimes you just have to know with that story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sajni. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the business of writing young adult. And I think it's really important when you want to publish a book that you stay up to date with things like the market and trends and all of those things. And so I'm wondering, how did you all stay up to date with what was happening in the publishing industry? And in the process of writing your book, did you take what was going on in the industry and like use that somehow in your work, or did you just get the story down and that came later? So Johnny, I'll start with you.
Just to like get into what's happening in publishing, I would say being on social media can help, like especially Twitter, where you can see all the announcement from publisher posts and stuff like that. I don't know if it's particularly important though. Like in reality, books that publishers are announcing right now aren't going to get published until like 2023, maybe even 2024 at this point. So if you're currently writing a book right now, like I don't know if I would necessarily stick strictly to what's happening currently in publishing. It changes all the time, especially for YA, it changes all the time. I would also say that, like, especially to BIPOC writers, to queer writers, to trans writers, to QT BIPOC writers, that like sometimes it's just not very healthy to be looking at stuff like that and keeping up with trends like that. I remember when I was drafting 1500 Miles from the Sun, like there was a lot of conversation about like we're done with coming out stories and things like that. And like I already had a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome just because it was the first time I'd ever tried to write a book. And like it was my first book I'd ever written. And like trying to figure out like if I was queer enough and Chicano enough to be writing this story already. And like what if like the seats at the table are taken? Like what if Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda and Aristotle and Dante have taken up both seats that I'm trying to take right now? Like sometimes being like really getting into like stuff like that can kind of mess with your head. So like I think what's more important is just like write what you want and enjoy writing that story. Like make sure you're happy writing that story. That's way more important than writing a story that specifically written to meet a certain publishing trend.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that, Johnny. And I think that's such an important thing to think about because like publishing has its problems. And so like if you just like follow what the trends are saying and stuff like that, like how are we ever going to make any real progress? So thank you. JJ, what about you?
So I didn't really take trends into account, and just like Johnny said, I don't think it's healthy as a writer to, it's good to know what else is out there that might be similar to your work, but not to obsess over it so much or choose a project based on what you think is going to sell as opposed to what's in your heart. And so I think that for me, the most helpful thing was just to read in the format and the genre that I wanted to write in. So I knew what had been done and what kind of conversation my book could be having with others. For me, it was like Cynthia Leidig Smith's Hearts Unbroken and E.B.'s A Boy's Pride and Mary H.K. Choi's Emergency Contact, that those were the big three contemporary YA books that I read that I was like, I can feel a spark of their lives in all of these things. And I want to write something that is similar to that has a spark of my life in a story. But other than that, other than finding like inspirational texts, to not worry too much about trends. Like, because everything's cyclical too, right? Like we can get vampires and dystopian and everything again. And just like Johnny said, there are so many points of view for these genres that have not had a chance to participate in them before. So it's just exciting to write whatever you've got going in your oogly googlies.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Sajni?
Yeah, I am going to agree that you can't really look at trends by the time a book is published or even announced. It's already been written years in prior. So trends are happening today or books that have already been written years ago. And by the time that your book is finished, by the time you write your book and get the deal, the trend's already done. So it's pointless. And I would say that perhaps you are writing something that is on trend and you see everyone selling a book just like this, it can mess with your head as well. And you might think like, oh, what's the point of writing this now? It's already out there, the market is saturated, etc. So just write what's in your heart, write the story that you really want to tell, write what's important to you. And another thing to keep in mind is that you're going to have to read this draft a million times. So if you're writing a book that you wrote just because there's a trend, you're gonna hate it. So you have to keep in mind that you're going to read this book over and over and over. I just turned in a copy edits for my 2022 YA, and I was surprised that I have to still go through the manuscript like 3 more times, and I'm like, just kill me now. And this is a book that I love. So I can't even imagine if I wrote a book just because it was a trend. And God, yeah, love what you write first and foremost.
Yes, that is great advice. And so JJ, I'm going to come back to you for this next question. And so I'm just wondering, what excites you most about writing young adult today? And you just made that change, So I'm wondering why it's exciting to you and also what you're excited to see from YA in the future.
It's exciting to me because I'm hopeful for the future, which sounds so cliche, but this generation of teens has already so positively affected my life. Like I never had terms like genderqueer or femme or being able to understand the multitudes of genders and sexualities like teens today have started that conversation that's now become part of the whole lexicon and the zeitgeist, and it's out there for people of all ages to understand. And so writing YA is sort of a thank you to them for what they've already taught me. And I think I have a few ideas about life that could be helpful if they're for a teen today. And so to have kind of this back and forth of here's inspiration for each other, which has been just really nice. And what I'm excited to see in the future of YA is just how many different viewpoints we're getting, specifically in terms of gender and sexuality. That it's not just cisgender guy, cisgender girl, it's not just gay and it's not just straight, and it's not just white. And so we're getting so many more viewpoints that I'm so excited about, so that this rainbow that we have in the LGBTQ world is fully being represented. Every color of it, every color in our sexuality spectrum, every color in our racial spectrum, and there's still work to be done. And I'm just excited that we're taking steps towards that direction. And I can't wait to see all the stories that are going to be out there.
Yes, same. Thanks, JJ. Johnny?
I don't know if I'd say that YA is at a point where it deserves being called diverse, but like it's definitely improving. Like I could probably count on two hands how many books by white authors there are on my bookshelf and have a finger or two remaining. And the same with non-queer books. And like while we still have a long way to go, it's becoming a whole lot easier to find these titles and these writers and have those like be the books that like fill your recommendation lists and your awards and your bookshelves because those titles deserve that. And as someone who believes in holding the door open for other people to come in too, like I'm just very excited about that. That even goes into just like I would love to see more writers like me writing Mexican American and Chicana literature. I think of like Sonora Reyes and Aaron Aceves, who both have debuts out next year, and like I've already read one of them, and like they're amazing, and I'm sure the other one is just as amazing too. And like people like E. Charlton Trujillo, who have been around for a while and still like writing exactly the kind of stories that we want to write. And I would love to also see more younger YA titles, like stories about freshman year and adjusting to life and all the cringy things that we do as 14 and 15-year-olds. Because like I know I was super cringy at that age. I am like, as much as generations differ, I am so sure that I refuse to believe that Gen Z is not just as cringy at that age too. Like I want to see quinces and sweet 16s and like first high school crushes and homecomings and city hawkins. Like, you know, just as for every, because I feel like we're kind of turning to a point where there's a lot of upper YA. Like I would love to see equal amounts of younger YA.
Thanks so much, Johnny. Sajni?
Yeah, I would say that I enjoy seeing more diversity. We still have a long way to go, but I really love to see readers who pick up a book and love a book, but it's not because that they relate it to the character in every way. Like we have straight readers reading queer books, or we have white folks reading a book about POC, and for them to enjoy it and not to focus on the main part of the book, I guess, or the main part of the character that's different from them, but finding themselves in the character in the book and just being able to enjoy it all around and being excited about it. One of the things that I would like to see more of is more equality across the board with different types of YA that are coming out, to have publishers that are equally excited about all these things, equally excited about all these authors, instead of just pushing a few big names or a few books that they feel are still more marketable. And I don't like that word marketable, because it makes it feel like some books are not worthy of getting that push or not worthy of having shelf space. And really, we should just rotate through all these books and find, our love of reading, because we read books because we love them. And I just want to see more of that in YA. Just pick up something that, I would say, just go to a bookstore and pick up something that you might have never read, or you think that you might not even be interested in for whatever reason. Just pick it up and read it. And I bet that you will find something that you're going to enjoy about that book.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sajni. So for our audience, this is going to be our last panel discussion question of the night. If you have any lingering questions, feel free to start putting them in the Q&A. But otherwise, this is our last question. So I want to talk about book covers for just a second, because your book covers are all so beautiful. I love them so much. And it's interesting because I think with YA or like children's books and stuff like that, you think that covers carry a little bit more weight because you want them to be eye-catching, you want them to attract, young readers' attentions. So I was just wondering if you could each talk about your covers and how they came to be. And Jason, June, I'll start with you.
I'm obsessed with this cover. The second I saw it, I literally screamed. I am so happy about it. Ricardo Besa is the illustrator and David DeWitt is the designer. And they came to be completely outside of my control, as happens often with publishing. I didn't know who we were going to reach out to until Ricardo was chosen, but I got to see his portfolio and instantly loved it. I was asked like during the sketching process if there's anything that I would change or if there's anything that stood out to me. But like 99.99999% of the stuff that Ricardo had already put in there, I was like, yes, all of it. The sparks in between them, you could feel their attraction. I just loved the whole Seattle skyline. The only thing I suggested was clothing for Max and Lou, and that was it. Lou, I was like, we should put her in her diner uniform because she's always working. And Max, I was like, here's what he would wear. That's more femme. And that was it. But I just love it. I stare at it all the time.
Yes, I love it too. Sajni, what about your book cover?
I'm with 3 publishers, so all of my the process with each publisher was different, but I'm very grateful that each publisher came to me and asked me what I wanted to see. With the knockouts, I didn't know what I wanted. I know that I wanted to have someone, a fighting style, but then, you know, she has the Mindy as well. So you kind of assume that she's Indian. And pink, because pink is a very important color in the book, and not for gender purposes or anything like that. But the first line of the book is actually pink is reserved for the most badass in Muay Thai. So it's a color that you have to earn the right to wear. And I was ecstatic. Like I screamed when I saw that this hardcover underneath was pink. And I feel that, you know, the cover came out great. I didn't really know what to expect, but my publisher actually asked me for like a whole document process. So I was able to give them typography and colors and images and comp covers from other YA books that I really liked. And I think it's just hard to be a designer because you have to find a way to visually show the story. And I loved how it came out. The only thing that I changed was maybe some of the way that the wrap is and where her knuckles are and the Mindy design. And I think we adjusted a little bit on the color, but it's pretty much what it was originally. And I'm just really happy with it. I'm happy with all of my covers, but yes, when you have a beautiful cover, it's just hard not to stare at it and really appreciate our cover artists and our designers. I mean, that's just amazing talents, and forever grateful for.
Yeah, thank you, Sajni. And I also screamed when I saw the pink under the book jacket. It's just so perfect. But yeah, so Johnny, what about you?
Yeah, so I went into it having very little idea of what I wanted my book cover to look like. They let me like have some input. They sent me like a PDF file of like I can like input answers to questions. It ended up being just mainly I sent them a lot of like Pinterest folders, boards of like face comps and also like color schemes that I liked and covers that I liked. Turns out that they didn't use the color I liked at all. And like the covers didn't really like not a comp at all. But like it also turned out really gorgeous. Like I love this. That is the lighting. Oh my God. I love this. Like I know that the one thing we did know for certain is that my agent was pushing to have Jules and Matt, who's a love interest, on the cover. Like we wanted 2 gay brown boys like right there. Besides that, there really wasn't any sort of image in my head. I was really blessed to have Jay Bant, who's my agent sibling, as the cover illustrator, who just like fully understood the assignment. I could never have envisioned like this at all, which is why I'm the writer. Like someone else will go and do that for us who has that talent, because severely lacking over here. It did take a minute though. Like my agent had in our contract that we did have the final say over approval of the cover. And when it came specifically to like design work, and there were things that were going back and forth for a pretty long while between there. Originally, like there were like little, it was like there was like a sun here at the bottom with like rays on the like separations. That ended up going away. We changed the font style and color a few times, like the perspective of like how far they are in there. Like we went through like 4 different drafts. At one point, I just kind of thought like my book is going to come out June 8th and I'll get my cover on June 9th, sort of situation. But thankfully, like I got a really incredible cover. I just think that like, you know, if you're someone going into that sort of thing, like if a cover is really what you're like willing to fight for, make sure that you like talk to your agent, or whenever you get an agent, and you get like the publishing deal of like cover is really important to me. Like, what can we do about like having some sort of say over this? Sometimes it doesn't happen, but it's always good to just like let your agent know like what is important to you and like factors about the cover that you want. Like we wanted both of them on the cover, and like that was just going to be a thing that happens regardless of if we had a say in or not. Like that was going to happen. So just making sure that you really identify with what's important in that, and that you express it and know when to say yes and like not back off.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I have more questions, but we're obviously not going to get to them. Thank you all for being here, and we're going to move into our Q&A session now. So to our audience, if you have any lingering questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. So our first question, any advice for aspiring novelists who want to get published? And you can all take a go at this if you'd like, or just one or two of you, whatever you feel like doing. JJ?
My biggest piece of advice is to find a critique group of people who have the same goals as you, who want to get published, and preferably in the same format, like the same age range, maybe even genre, but I don't think genre is necessarily an end-all be-all. Just because when you can find people that also want to get published, they're more likely to give you constructive feedback, constructive criticism, as opposed to like friends and family who are just like, I love you, so I love this. Whereas people that you don't necessarily know in your personal life, but will get to form a friendship as time goes on, but who you meet with the goal of being two writers trying to get published together, will give each other feedback of what you think they're trying to do, but aren't quite getting across yet, and won't give you the necessarily quote unquote easy out that, at least in my experience, I found friends and family were more apt to do.
Yes, thank you. Sajni, Johnny, anything to add?
Yeah, that's very important to have the critique group, to have someone who's going to be there and tell you this is all wrong, but we still love you. And just to get to know writers and to build up your writing community, because this is a hard industry and it can steal your soul at times. So you really need that support group, and to have a community of writers with you. They understand what you're going through. So that's one thing I would add on to. The other thing is to read a lot. And I personally analyze what I'm reading. If I find something that's very engaging and very smooth, I try to figure out what this writer did to make that happen so that I can incorporate it into my writing, because I'm always learning to be a better writer. Or if something doesn't work for me, to try to figure out why it doesn't work and how I would have fixed it. So I'm always analyzing everything that I write and analyzing everything that I read. And I think that's really important to also keep you moving forward. No one's going to be the perfect writer. You always have to evolve. And that's okay. It's okay to evolve. It's okay to admit that you need some practice and some work, because we all do. I know that I do.
Yes, thank you, Sajni. Johnny?
I feel like I'm just gonna end up repeating everything that they said, but like one, like yes, there's so much value in like a good critique partner or beta reader. If you're looking for that sort of thing and you're on Twitter, like there are a lot of like hashtag sort of situations. There's like work in progress chat. I think it's like WIP chat or WIQ chat that they do a thing like every Sunday where you get to like talk about what you're writing and meet people who are also writing things. If you're a queer person of color, there's QPOC chat like every second Wednesday of the month. And there's like hashtag s'mores words, I think, that like also has a bunch of writers interacting with each other. And you get to meet people who, a lot of them are aspiring to publishing. So like you're just coming up with them and like you're facing the same things they're facing, and will continue to do so. And they're just going to kind of like end up being that core group of people that you're going to end up making a group chat with and saying all the terrible things about publishing with, but also celebrating all the great things about publishing with. Also to reiterate, like definitely read, if you're writing YA, if you're writing YA contemporary, like read YA contemporary and think of those books, enjoy them, but also like Sajni said, like think of them like critically, think of them as textbooks. Like after I drafted 1500 Miles from the Sun, I read Darius the Great Is Not Okay, and This Is Kind of an Epic Love Story by Case and Callender. And like both of those were just like, things about both of them I just like really like took to heart. And I was like, okay, like these are phenomenal for like two different reasons. Like, how can I do something this good, but in my own way? And like, just kind of like think about the good and like how you can incorporate that into your own voice, and think about what you didn't really like about it. And like, why didn't you really like about it? Like, not that it's terrible, but like, it doesn't work for your own vision of your own writing. Um, and also like a really good query is super helpful. Like, you know, I cannot downplay the importance of just a really good query. So make sure that like, look at any sort of helpful information you can about querying and like what a query letter should look like whenever you get to that stage. Make sure like the whole manuscript should be cute, but like if you can really get those first 5 pages, those first 10 pages, those first 3 chapters, like to a point where you yourself cannot make them any better, and just you know every single line like by memory, like you those are the ones that are going to grab the agent's attention. Those are going to be like anywhere between those first 5 pages of the first 3 chapters are going to be what they're looking at to see if they want to read the whole thing. Like, yeah, like, you know, worry about the other stuff later. They're going to end up helping you regardless. Like that little segment needs to be really what shines for you.
Thank you, Johnny. And Johnny, this next question is actually for you. So Dan said, Johnny, you mentioned your protagonist's misstep of getting drunk and coming out on Twitter. Can you talk a little bit more about social media and what it means in the lives of young people you write about?
Yeah, I think that you probably could, but like, I just don't know how you would write contemporary YA without including social media. Like, you know, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or some made up version of all of those, because who knows how long any of these are going to actually last. Like, teens are on their phones or on their computers, are interacting with other teenagers or other content creators. And also, like, again, just fully inspired by Simon Verses and like his whole like Tumblr persona, and like what might that look like in 2018, late 2018 when I wrote it, because Tumblr really wasn't a thing anymore. I mean, it kind of was, but like not really. And so kind of just like navigating like, what does contemporary YA look like? And like, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. In my second book, like it's not nearly as huge of a thing as it is in this book, but like, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who is below 20 not on Instagram.
JJ, I see you nodding. Do you have anything to add?
No, just totally. That's where it's all at. Like, and where we find our readers too is through social media. That's where they're all interacting. And so, yeah.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, next question is from Amelie. So one obstacle YA authors must get past is the gatekeepers, school librarians in particular. Keeping that in mind with regards to sex and YA, do y'all find that you need to filter the content in order to get past the gatekeeper so the books can get in front of target teen audiences? And same question with regards to swear words. So Sajni, would you like to take a go at this first?
Oh, I personally don't. I never think about them. I never thought about them. I just write for the teen audience. Like, I write for my reader and what I feel that they might enjoy and what I want to express with my story. However, I will say that in my stories, I guess that they could be considered clean teen. They don't have a lot of cursing. Yes, there's some violence because I have a MMA fighter here, but and there's no sex. There's a couple of kisses, maybe. You have to read, I guess, to find out. But I never think about that stuff. But I'm also not in a position where I'm keeping a lot of boundaries.
Thank you, Sajni. JJ.
Yeah, I don't think about the gatekeepers either. I lean into it, where it's just like, even in the jacket copy, it's like, this is sex positive. I definitely want people to know that there's going to be a lot of conversation about sex in my work when that is a large topic of conversation, because sometimes people aren't always in the mood to read about sex, which I totally get. But the readers who are needing these kind of books are more important to me than worrying about the gatekeepers.
Thank you. Johnny, anything to add?
I think I would say if that's something that you're validly worried about, like maybe present that sort of thing to your editor or your publisher. Not necessarily to like edit things out of it, but just like how can they as a publisher help you get into libraries specifically, I think is like what the question is talking about. But even more so like in my own experience, I mean, I'm sure that there are librarians who probably read my book and like see cussing and like, no, that's okay. I'm not about that. But also like I've had interactions with librarians who've loved my book, and like especially librarians here in Texas who have loved my book. And like I would rather pay attention to that any day of the week than someone who might see the first few chapters of my book and think that it's not fit for kids. Even though it, you know, I mean, I think it is. And plenty of librarians do. But yeah, like just focus on the good of it. Like I think is a lot healthier. Especially, I mean, you know, we're gonna get supported regardless. Like as much as we don't, we will. And so like, just put your attention where it's healthy too. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that's it for tonight, but thank you all so much for being here. Buy our panelists' books. We should be putting the book people link in the chat box anytime now. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank y'all.
Have a great night.